Good morning all. Tarek, thank you for the very nice introduction. My apologies, we should have admitted you, recruited you, and then kept you there. CNA. So I guess we just had this very nice introduction about Seoul, but I think of this V being in South Korea. Let's just walk back a couple of decades or so. So the way I understand Korean history, South Korea was not so rich, kind of primarily an agrarian society, right? And then from that point onwards, go forward a couple of decades, South Korea is basically a global economic colossus, right? Basically creativity, hard working, and persistence. We have Samsung, the largest high-tech company in the world. Hyundai, for my friends from the US, is actually a bigger company than Ford, right? Which is about 100 years old or more. Right? Henry Ford, for all his fame and reputation, Hyundai is bigger than Ford, right? So basically, creativity and hard work went very far and revolutionized, if you will, the South Korean economy. So now let's basically map that to vehicles that can drive themselves over the next couple of decades. Many of us, including I, we believe that this technology will revolutionize transportation as we know it, create more change than has been seen in the automotive industry for the past 50 to maybe even 100 years. So that's the technology impact of what self-driving vehicles can bring to the table. So let me talk about challenges and opportunities ahead in this context. So here's a quick outline. I'll talk about what the social impact of automobiles is today. I'll talk about some challenges from a research perspective for vehicles that can drive themselves. I'll give you a quick sense for the technical approaches that we at Carnegie Mellon adopt in this context. And then I'll summarize with some opportunities and some open problems. Hopefully I can leave some time for Q&A. We start a little bit later, I guess. So here is a picture from 1939. This is a World Expo where General Motors, then basically a very dominant vendor in the automotive space, basically put up this figure. That's actually a video that goes along with it, where basically this is in the late 1930s, a family sitting in a car, playing cards, and the vehicle is driving itself. So the vision from an automotive vendor goes back to the late 1930s. And then actually you can actually be a little bit more ambitious and actually go back to the horse-driven carriage era. And in those days, somebody basically even thought of maybe why do we actually have horses to basically draw the carriage? Why don't we just basically have a horseless carriage? It's not clear when this photograph actually dates from. So the vision has been around, if you will. So this is not a new vision. I think what has changed over the past decade or so is that technologies have matured. Convergence of many different technologies has reached a point where vehicles, where you can actually imagine vehicles being capable of driving themselves. Okay, so that's where we are. So that is what has changed. So now let's talk about automobiles, and then I guess pretty much you step out of this hotel and you basically see tons and tons of cars on very wide streets with multiple lanes and so on. So automobiles pretty much dominate the transportation landscape, globally speaking. But there's actually a serious downside to this. About 1.2 million people die every year globally due to automotive accidents. 1.2 million people. And most of these accidents, more than 90%, some people say it's 93% of these accidents happen due to human distraction. If instead humans being distracted by any number of reasons, if the vehicle is able to drive itself, we believe that these accidents can go down over time. The second aspect is that traffic delays are expensive. Again, step outside. You basically are stuck in traffic lights and stuck in a traffic jam quite a bit in Seoul, and these delays are expensive from a productivity standpoint. Right? If you are the person driving the car, you're just waiting there for traffic to move, the traffic light to change, and so on. If instead the vehicle is being driven by its own virtual chauffeur, you can be doing something productive while the vehicle is basically going from point A to point B. And lastly, people who are disabled, people who are elderly lose their driving privileges. So basically they lose their mobility options. lose their independence perhaps, and then their quality of life can go down dramatically because they become dependent on other people. Some of these people are very spurious, they do not want to ask for help, and the end result is that they would rather stay at home all by themselves, not for ask for help, get depressed maybe and all that, and quality of life is not so good. Instead, vehicles can actually drive themselves, they don't need to ask for help, they'll be able to go from point A to point B, mobility options come back, independence comes back, and the quality of life will go up dramatically. So there's any number of economic and societal reasons for this technology to actually play a major deep economic impact on both economics and society of the globe at large. So the vision that we set out so basically looks as follows. Go to your favorite search engine, do a search for automotive accidents. You can literally get millions of images of accidents. Okay. And today, we basically pretty much take those accidents for granted. It is a fact of modern life. We deal with it, we live with it, primarily by taking on insurance, and then you basically cast your dice. We believe this need not be a fact of modern life. Okay. So the grand challenge that we set for ourselves is basically, can we get to an era where technology can be utilized, where basically automotive fatalities go down to zero. Right? So I'm a very well-grounded person. Right? This number of automotive fatalities may never ever reach zero, because the technology itself could actually introduce some problems as well. But as long as the number of 1.2 million goes down to say 120,000, 12,000, maybe 1,200 over time, society is a huge winner. Right? So that's the vision that drives us. So in this context, let me talk about the so-called DARPA grant urban challenge that actually happened in 2007. This was the US military agency named Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. As a culmination of a sequence of competitions, they actually held this urban competition in 2007. The objective was that cars without anybody in them need to be able to drive around on a course, an urban-like course, about 60 miles in fewer than 6 hours. And this competition to me basically was a big turning point in the history of automated vehicles, which goes back to at least the 1930s, if not earlier. So this is the vehicle that our team from Carnegie Mellon fielded. Let's just cut to the punchline, we won the competition. But to me, this particular competition was a watershed moment in the history of the evolution of the vision of autonomous vehicles. This event basically has saw 6 vehicles, or 6 teams rather, complete the competition, right, of 60 miles or so, with 5 vehicles completing within the stipulated time of 5 hours. So this event was singular and basically proved to the world that driverless vehicles, automated vehicles, are no longer a question, it's no longer science fiction. It is only a question of when, not if. So this to me basically changed the tide over, completely saying that, hey, who can win, who can dominate, and who can benefit. It's completely changed the name of the game in 2007. I have a few video clips in here about how our vehicle was driving around in that course, was able to improvise itself, because the course actually consisted of vehicles that were driving themselves, human-driven vehicles and so on. As you might imagine, things did go wrong, vehicles would misbehave, refuse to move for quite some time. Some vehicles basically run into buildings and so on. 2 vehicles at least bumped slightly into each other, and vehicles had to pass because some vehicles would be slow, some would be fast. But suffice it be said that these 6 teams that are completed were able to basically complete the competition. So in the interest of time, let me not show the clips. So look at this vehicle. Basically, it had all sorts of sensors hanging over it. Right? So that's the point we are at SenSys. And these sensors categories included radars, lidars, I guess laser radars as some refer to them, and cameras. Many combinations. We had almost about 20 sensors or so on BOSS, which was the name of the vehicle that we had, named after General Motors Pioneer. Some of these sensors were used for detecting roads, some of them were for detecting obstacles, some for tracking vehicles, and so on. So different combinations were used. As I said before, literally changed the name of the game after this competition was over. Right? The fact that 6 teams actually had the personnel and the expertise to basically make it happen. So again, literally changed the rules of the game at that point. Right? But then you actually stand back and say, hey, what where the requirements that really happen, urban setting, autonomous vehicles, other autonomous vehicles on the same course. There were traffic rules that everybody had to follow, vehicles being driven by humans, parking lots, unpaved roads, and so on. Right? But then basically it turned out that there were no pedestrians on the course. The standing joke is that nobody volunteered to be a pedestrian on the course. Same reason, no bicyclists, no traffic signals. Because it was only meant to be a competition for 6 hours, you do not have to worry about failures over the longer term, over months and years and so on. So you could basically did not have to worry about sensor failures, actuator failures, and processing failures. And by rule, DARPA said there cannot be any incoming communications or outgoing communications. No connectivity of any kind. And they did not put any limitations on the amount of money that you could actually spend on a car. You could basically throw in as many sensors as you want, as many actuators, processors, communications, as long as you can afford it. Right? So well-funded teams like ours, you could basically spend a lot of money on a car. And this competition was actually happening on a desert, in the desert, on an abandoned Air Force base, where no bad weather conditions, basically bright sunny day with the blue skies with very few clouds even, and therefore at daytime we had to worry about nighttime operation. The traffic when the competition began, you could probably say it was kind of relatively heavy. There were about 11 autonomous vehicles, there were about maybe upwards of 25, 30 human-driven vehicles and so on. So initially you had to interact with a whole bunch of other vehicles, but as time went by, self-autonomous vehicles basically kind of disqualified themselves doing something that they were not supposed to do, and then they were removed from the course. And DARPA also chose to basically remove some human-driven vehicles from the course and so on. So as the race went on, ironically, it did actually become easier, it turns out. And then because it was open skies throughout the competition, GPS was always available, and we could even use military-grade GPS if we could have had access to it. And we had access to high-resolution maps of the entire area, so you could basically know very precisely where you are, you precisely know the domain that you're actually driving in. And they also had a speed limit of 30 miles per hour, primarily for safety purposes. This was like the very first time that vehicles were being tested on open roads or interacting with each other, so to basically avoid problems, safety problems, there was a limitation of 30 miles per hour. So again, historical competition, but they actually look at the assumptions, right? None of this would really work in practice on a day-to-day basis, right? So technology really had to evolve quite a bit from that point in time. So now let me basically delve into what permits humans to drive, right? How are we able to drive in these complex situations and so on, right? And then, so where are we in terms of technological standpoint? If, for example, go back to the previous slide, right, we are able to basically meet all these requirements, generally speaking. So to me, there are really two sides of humans, kind of like if you cannot decode the picture on the top right, it's Jekyll and Hyde. Okay? There's a good part and a not so good part. Right? So I guess the good part is that the more I've been working on self-driving vehicles, the more I have come to respect the intelligence that we as humans have. It's really some kind of a super intelligence that we barely can scratch the surface of. Brains have evolved and our neural networks have evolved, and then we're able to basically live in a very complex environment which changes all the time. We're able to adapt and cope with it. Just remarkable intelligence. To me, it'll be a very long time before our computers can basically reach this level of sophistication. Let me give you some. The vision system alone is extremely high resolution. And it also, because we have two eyes, we actually get depth information, and meanwhile we have iris aperture control, and we can basically focus on different parts of the same view that we have. So the vision system alone is actually very sophisticated. Right? The cognitive system that we have, or more precisely in this case, the recognition system, I can look at a room like this with about 150 people or so, and quickly walk around the room instantaneously, and basically I can pretty much say the gender of the person, maybe approximate age of the person, right? The ethnicity perhaps, right? Very quickly I can basically comment upon the dresses that you wear, instantaneous. I don't have to think about it. I just know. We just know. Right? It's just remarkable capabilities that we have, near instant detection, right? And to me, even more surprising, if I basically show you something, and basically, for example, we had a nice presentation about South Korea, Seoul. She shows a Korean palace, right? Pictures of 5 palaces. You just need to see one picture. The next time you see basically a South Korean palace, you say, that's a South Korean palace. You see it once, and you basically see some other palace, completely different perspective, you say that's a South Korean palace. No problems, just instantaneous. We are basically able to learn significantly from one, maybe a few examples of very complex things. And to me, I would say basically we seem to have this almost unreasonable reasoning power. Why do I say unreasonable? We basically have computers, if you will, which can basically a giga instruction processing capability per second. We can't go anywhere across this. We can basically logically reason, we can generalize from a small set of examples. You can show me one model of the car, I can look at the intricate details of I like this particular shape of the car, this particular styling of the door and so on. We can generalize, we can specialize as well. Right? And then we basically have spatial intelligence, we can reason about spaces, we can actually reason about time at multiple time scales, both spatial and temporally. We have intuition, we have instincts, and we basically learn from experience. Right? And remarkably, because many of us travel from abroad, we can basically adapt to the local culture, the conventions, the rules of the local society fairly quickly. And then basically we also have this coordinated built-in way of coordinating sensing and actuation, where basically we interact with other folks out there, even animals it turns out, with animals. We make eye contact, we actually have pleasantries that we exchange, and we have some kind of a game theory that goes on where we are cooperative and competitive at the same time. Right? So it's just basically saying that, wow, we have to be impressed by what we as humans can do. So this is the bright side of humans. So let me say this. It will be a very long time before the computers and software on our cars will reach any sophistication anywhere close to what humans in general can do. So this is the left side. Okay. It will be a long time. Okay. I can make that assertion. But meanwhile, that's the other side. We are basically, as humans, have some fundamental weaknesses as well. Right? So one is that we can be easily distracted. We can doze off, and basically we can have conversations while we are driving. We can be easily diverted as you're driving by. You see a structure, you turn around, you get distracted from the driving process. We can be intoxicated, we can be angry, and so on. Right? So that is the human frailty, if you will. This is the term human in the negative sense of the word. And meanwhile, we do have imperfect sensing, because we have many number of people who have to wear glasses, contact lenses, and then over age, basically get poor vision and so on. Right? And then meanwhile, we only have eyes at the front, right? We do not have eyes at the back, so we have to turn around. So there are physical limitations. We cannot get 360-degree view at any given point in time. Right? We as humans cannot. And then meanwhile, our reasoning powers, right, well, they are super in many sense of the word. We really do not quite fully understand vehicle dynamics, right? Particularly in the slippery conditions, rainy, snowy conditions, and so on. Many of us believe that we are extremely good at multitasking, but if we run some tests, that is not the case. Right? We are actually relatively poor at multitasking by and large. We can be extremely overconfident. Many of us can relate to that. And then it turns out that our instincts and intuition can actually be substantially wrong at critical moments. Right? Why do I say that? 1.2 million people die every year, right? Most of us just basically incorrect judgment, distractions, and the kind we make the wrong decisions. When push comes to shove, we make the wrong decision. And then it turns out that our reactions can be relatively slow compared to computers. Our reactions are slow, and then reflexes can also get poor due to age or health. Right? So this is the high part of humans. So on this side of the equation, if you will, on the right-hand side, computers can do a lot better, a lot better. So basically what I'm trying to say is that there are really counteracting forces, the super intelligence of humans and the core weaknesses of humans, right? So they're basically fighting each other, and computers can basically substitute for the weaknesses. It will take a long time to basically approximate the intelligence, and that's where we are in. So it turns out that the driving process, we can actually have computers and software basically help compensate for the weaknesses on the right, while evolve towards the left, it could take a very long time. Okay, so now let's basically map what happens within a driverless vehicle, so to speak. On the left, you basically see sensors, right? Could be different combination of sensors. along with communication interface, which are able to actually talk to the rest of the environment. They come in as inputs perhaps, and then they get fused together in a so-called perception layer. So you basically know there's a road in front of you, maybe a traffic signal, and maybe payments to your side. And then that in turn gets mapped to a global context, think GPS, you know where on the planet you are, where on the map you are. And that in turn feeds a behavioral layer which basically applies the rules of the road that the car has to obey, right? Given this particular context that you're in, and it basically say, hey, we can do the following to move forward towards the destination, right, while being safe. And that in turn basically would talk to a path planner to basically say, over the next 15-20 meters, depending upon the speed that you're in, here is the path that you can take, or choose from many different paths. You typically tend to choose paths that are comfortable to passengers in the car, and also basically keep you safe as well. And then that in turn basically will tell the vehicle's controls, the steering wheel, the brake pedal, the gas pedal, and the transmission shift, and secondary controls like wipers, hazard lights, honks, and so on. Right? And that's basically going to happen. And of course, all of the software and the integration of the sensors and the actuators have to happen on an embedded computing platform. You would typically log everything that's going on. And then from a higher level, like user perspective, if you will, there must be a user interface that the people in the car, whether as a driver or not, basically has to be using. There's a health monitor, which basically keeps track of the health status of all the subsystems in the car, and if something goes wrong, it needs to react appropriately. We'll talk about that shortly. And then the mission planning should really be called route planning. Go into the car, think of your GPS device, you tell the car where you want to go. Could be a touchscreen interface, could be a voice interface. And at that point in time, when you engage self-driving mode, the vehicle basically takes you from the current location to your destination. So that's kind of a generic architecture for what happens in the vehicle. Just to keep that as we talk about things as we go forward. So let me take a breather here, right? So summarize where we are. So the DARPA Urban Challenge proved within a shadow of doubt to me, at least in my mind, that self-driving technology is only a matter of time. And then we have these fundamental challenges of meeting, for example, we cannot approximate the intelligence of humans for quite some time, but we can compensate for their inherent weaknesses. And then we kind of know what the architecture roughly looks like, even based on what the humans we seem to be doing. So then we basically said at that point in time is when General Motors, which was our biggest partner and sponsor for the DARPA Urban Challenge, they basically started another lab that I've been running since, focusing exclusively on autonomous driving at CMU. Why did GM come in at that point in time? Because it was an urban competition, and they could see, hey, if vehicles are able to drive themselves in an urban-like setting, interact with other vehicles which are actually misbehaving, maybe this is for real, and basically they want to actually invest more money. And then, but that doesn't really mean that hey, these challenges, these problems are immediately solvable. So we try to categorize what challenges need to be solved. The first set of challenges that we thought need to be solved, if I can use that word, is that it's an exogenous or coming from outside external challenges. The complexities and uncertainties that the real world throws at us. Right? So completely beyond the control of the vehicle. So basically that could be bad weather conditions, poor lighting conditions, horrendous road conditions. That could be construction going on, that could be accidents. Information in your map could be obsolete, your GPS could be lost. Right? Completely above and beyond the control of the vehicle and its technology. Right? This is going to be around for a long, long time. We're not going to fully address it, we'll just be able to deal with it. The second set of challenges is endogenous, coming from within interior challenges, where there are sensors, actuators, computers, and the communications in the vehicle. Any of them can fail at any time. Right? So how do you deal with that? And then, so if you actually delve that a little bit more, your sensors and actuators can actually go out of calibration because of the vibrations, hitting potholes, and so on. They can wear and tear over time. And of course, they'll eventually fail, maybe with some kind of a curve, if you will. So what used to work yesterday doesn't work anymore today. So you have to basically, but these are essentially within the technology's control within the vehicle. So maybe there's some handle over that. Third problem is that pretty much anybody who works in this domain, we do a humongous amount of testing and on private tracks, on public roads, and so on. But no matter how much you test, how do you know for sure that then the vehicle is basically out on a public road, sees an environment which has not seen before, that the vehicle is going to do the right thing. Right? How do you, can you guarantee the vehicle will be safe at all times? Right? At this point, we cannot guarantee that. It's not clear that we'll be able to guarantee that in the near future either. So the question remains, how do we verify and validate correctness of these systems, because we'll be putting multiple lives every day. And so the that urban challenge, vehicles could not interact with one another, communicate with one another, right? But in the real world, we do actually, as humans, we actually make eye contact, we let people in. Actually, of course, we have very many negative reactions, but that's also means of communications as well. So in the real world, we will actually have vehicles communicating with each other, with infrastructure, and with the cloud as well. From a reliability perspective, okay, there are cost aspects, maintenance aspects, there are societal aspects. Will society accept this? Right? For example, right after the first accident with the self-driving vehicle, will society continue to basically accept the technology? And then from a security standpoint, this is really a cyber-physical system, so it's really about security of the cyber-physical components, right? How do you prevent attacks on the connectivity portals that the car has for various communication capabilities? There are clearly human factors, so basically humans are in the car, or basically human-driven vehicles in the environment. How do they react to basically certain misbehaviors of the vehicle that drives itself? This technology by necessity and by definition will be deployed incrementally, right? We are now going to switch overnight from human-driven vehicles to autonomous vehicles, which will be incremental. And then lastly, there are legal questions, regulatory issues that need to be addressed. There's a bunch of policy issues as well. So basically, there's a long list of challenges that need to be addressed for vehicles to be driving themselves without anybody in the car. It is a long list of challenges. So let me give you now a sense for what we at Carnegie Mellon have been doing, at least in some of these areas, at least on the technology side of things. We have work going on in the non-technical areas like policy as well, but let me at least give you a sense for that. The area is fairly broad, but let me give you a sense for that. So basically, there are multiple sensors. It turns out that you do need multiple sensors. Different sensors have their own strengths and weaknesses. You have to use multiple groups of sensors so that you can try to get the best of all possible worlds. For example, camera is not good at night, but a LiDAR and a radar does not care, as an example. And conversely, cameras see levels of details that radars and maybe even affordable LiDARs cannot see, as an example. So here, for example, this our setup where basically we can literally see all around the car, and we can see in front of the car and so on. We have to deal with static obstacles, we have to deal with moving obstacles, we have to track cars on roadways, we have to track cars at intersections and so on. And when you're on a highway, you'll be able to see how many lanes there are, where the lane markers are and such. Right? So basically, sensors are to be fused together to perceive the world. And meanwhile, if you look at the environment, there could be road signs, there could be barrels, cones, and channelizers of different kinds, potholes, and just you look at construction work zone signs, they could actually come in many different sizes and shapes. Right? To us as humans, we just broadly categorize them as construction things. Right? But to a computer today, we have to actually teach them literally almost on a case-by-case basis with hundreds of thousands of images, as an example. So that's an example of that. And then meanwhile, for example, this is not a video clip, we actually have some vision technology where we can actually identify a construction zone. Then basically if you see the, I know that all of you can see it, to the bottom left basically we actually say that we know that the vehicle is in a construction zone, and when we see the end of construction zone sign, we can switch back to we are in normal mode if you will. So we can do that. And we can also in real time detect channelizers, and we can actually drive away from those cones and barrels in the construction zone. Right? So we can do some things. Okay? But I watch the science out here, the conventions out here, very different. Our vehicle has to be retaught how to deal with those things when it comes here, for example. So let me talk about more encounters. Wildlife, they're not going to follow any set pattern that we expect them to. You could basically have a wildlife of a human kind, if you will. Tourists taking pictures, basically school guards, wheelchairs, and kids crossing the road. To us, these are all traffic lights. A traffic light is a traffic light, but they actually come in different shapes and sizes, different orientations. Again, we as humans can instantaneously generalize, not so for computers. Then meanwhile, bicycles are very common. I guess there's a health awareness among the population. So let me just play these videos quickly. On the top left, you see bicycles driving perpendicular to our car, so we can detect them in real time. There's basically a vehicle on the pavement driving parallel to the direction of the car, which we can. play this video as well. So we can actually have multiple bicyclists driving in front of the car, we can detect them as well. So these are standard paradigms, if you will. So computer vision does help to some degree, if you will. And then it turns out that when the vehicle runs into some problem that it cannot deal with, you would really like it to actually pull over to the shoulder and stop there. We've been looking at, for example, how to look at the rest of the environment. There are concrete barriers, there are guardrails, there are soft shoulders. You can drive on a concrete on a barrier, but on a concrete shoulder, but you cannot drive on a soft shoulder, for example. So basically, we have taken it through computer vision algorithms. And we can basically feeding it several examples of and then labeling them as concrete barriers, guardrails, soft shoulders, then marking very labor-intensive activity that happens, and then basically using some standard computer vision techniques, we are able to actually find out that, for example, this is a concrete surface and that's a soft barrier and so on. So let me just quickly play this. So we are able to actually detect from camera images where we think the shoulders are, and the shadows from the car do not confuse it either. Right? But this works only during daytime. Right? So it's very labor intensive, but it only works under some constraints. Right? But we are able to basically detect where the soft shoulders are, where concrete barriers are, where the concrete shoulders are, and so on. So that basically says that computer vision has a long way to go. Object recognition has a long way to go. We can do a reasonable job, but a long way to go. So let me talk about the verification problem, so to speak. Again, a very, very long way to go, but let me just give you some insight. I'm working with Professor Ed Clark, who's a Turing Award winner, kind of a pioneer in model checking. So we've been working with them for the past several years. So our self-driving vehicle is controlled by a code base. It's about 500,000 lines of code so far. And we took one piece of that, the behavior layer, which is safety critical, and about 24,000 lines of code, combined numerical computations and logical control as well. And if you look at it from the state space that needs to be explored, there are some discrete changes in the software where you basically say, I found a vehicle, I need to slow down. I do not see a vehicle, I can accelerate. My gap is safe enough, I just basically maintain my speed. So there's some discrete changes in the software logic, so to speak, but the vehicle state itself, the speed, the velocity, and acceleration is in continuous space. So the number of states that you have to explore is infinite, right? By definition. So the question is, how do you basically do this? So how do we reason about whether the code is being saved, at least in behavioral layers? It turns out that Professor Ed Clark and his postdoc, in this case Dr. Sean Gao, they use a technique called bounded model checking, looking at some what is referred to the domain as inductive invariance, where they can actually take C++ code, translate that into basically a set of first-order logic formulas, and then pass it through an SMT solver, a satisfiability modular theory solver, and they can basically make some statements about whether safety properties are being satisfied or not. So basically it's not only just a technique, you actually have tools that can basically take the original code, in this case distance keeping code, meaning actually driving behind a vehicle, you want to maintain safe distance between yourself and the vehicle in front of you, and then they are able to process that, generate some logic formulas, and then send those logic formulas through this solver tool that Dr. Sean Gao built called DReal. It's basically a bounded checking model with delta properties, bounded properties over the space of real numbers. And basically they're able to come up with an answer saying that they actually verified that this particular distance keeper that we have actually is safe. Even though it's actually exploring an infinite space, they basically came back and said it does the right thing as specified. And it turns out that the code actually can be downloaded, not the distance keeper code, but the DReal code can be downloaded from Dr. Sean Gao's website. So we have made some very early inroads into the verification process. Long way to go again, but very early inroads. And then just to give you a sense for the same idea of bounded checking can be applied above and beyond model checking as well. And the idea basically is that any sensor value that you get is not precise or not accurate. There could be some error margins, if you will, and you can basically take into account those error margins that you have, and therefore the vehicle is actually driving right to your right, and there's an obstacle on the road, and and you know that there are some measurements which are noisy, you basically add that noise margin to your measurements, and you basically try to drive away from the obstacle, even though you have some uncertainties in your measurements. So from a high-level conceptual standpoint, basically, if you have a high R model, you basically try to do safety analysis on that. It is basically practically infeasible. What we have found is that by introducing some error margins of some kind, we are able to translate the high order model from a low order model, and then the reachability analysis for this low order model is feasible, and we can verify this, and then basically using a concept called model inclusion, we can basically generalize from a low order model to the high order model and declare it to be verified, right, within this bound, so to speak, right, within the bound that we have made this approximation set. So there are some approaches for verification. From a dependency standpoint, how do you deal with failures of subsystems? We, for example, have looked at the problem of what happens if processors fail. Basically, we have 4 computers in our current car, for example, A, B, C, D, and different computers run different code, and then basically there's a user interface, sensors and actuators and so on, a whole bunch of network links. And here, basically, if you drill into each of these processors, there are multiple tasks running. Turns out that if, for example, that processor fails, our sensor fuser dies, our radar readers fail, our CAN communication, that's a communication bus that fails, and then what happens is that the car at that point in time becomes blind, it gets no sensory input, and everything else that happens in the system is just meaningless at that point. This vehicle is unsafe. So what we did basically was come up with an architecture that is called safer software architecture for failure evasion in real-time systems. Just a cute acronym. The idea basically is what has been known in the domain distributed computing, fault-tolerant systems for quite some time. We can actually detect failures of processes, we can detect failures of processors, and when the failure is detected, we can switch over to a hot standby or a cold standby, and we can basically reallocate tasks as necessary, and at any given point in time, we can ensure that the most critical tasks continue to run, independent of how many processors you have. So we do have this actually running in the car. So I'm being very precise here. Yes, we can deal with this, except that we can only deal with processor failures. We are right now looking at sensor failures and communication failures and actuator failures. Turns out there are hardware constraints. For example, communication buses are not designed to be fault tolerant, so your processing interfaces have to be supporting redundant versions and so on. We have some early ideas, but I believe it is solvable. Right? It's not that we have solved it, I believe it is solvable. It is solvable. And then we need to be able to gracefully degrade, and then whatever resources you have, you need to do the best job with your currently available resources. So I'll just give you a sense for kind of different layers where we are making some advances. Let me basically now take a step back and talk about how, if we basically had self-driving vehicles on the roads, what would change on the roads, if anything. So let me show the following. This was actually a video that one of our sponsors gave us. Yeah, take a look. So as the title of the slide says, this is produced by a marketer. After that's basically the vehicle that was being marketed by our sponsor and so on. So you can basically get rid of traffic signals. This was a video that they showed us about 4 or 5 years back. I was actually inspired by it. It's actually very nicely made marketing visual and so on. But of course, right, so this is crazy. So why can't we do this? Let me then basically go and play this video. I believe this is a video from a South Asian country, a Southeast Asian country. No traffic signals. Yeah, look at the bus up there. So basically, so here is a complex intersection, no traffic signals, all kinds of vehicles, and we as humans, we are able to cross this intersection without running into each other and without killing each other for the most part. Right? So at least in this video, nobody died, nobody was harmed during the taping of this process. Right? So to me, the key aspect is the following. everybody who's basically driving a vehicle in this context, right, is a human. Each one basically has a brain, has sensors and actuators, and they basically sense the environment, and there exists a distributed solution to this problem. Right? And basically the alternative that we would have in the current infrastructure is basically put a traffic light. Traffic light basically says, this lane can go now, this lane has to stop now, and we, the super intelligent beings, have to wait for the stupid traffic light, and we can go only when the traffic light in its infinite wisdom says you can go, right? As boring as it gets. And then all of us have basically had this experience where you're driving at 1 a.m. at night, you come to a traffic light, there's absolutely nobody else in any direction. You have to sit there, you the super intelligent being, you're waiting for the stupid traffic light to basically change its mind and give you a green light after a minute. Right? Everybody has gone through this experience. So to contrast these two, a completely distributed decentralized solution on the right, a completely centralized dumb solution on the left. That's what we did today. And we basically said if vehicles can actually talk to each other, right, can we basically change the name of the game? And we actually did come up with a family of intersection protocols that we call V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle intersection protocols. The idea is the following. Each time a vehicle goes towards intersection, basically says, it broadcasts on a regular basis, I'm coming towards this intersection, on this lane, I need to go straight, make a right or make a left. You basically broadcast that along with your GPS coordinate and your vehicle ID. And everybody coming towards intersection also does that, right? And when you receive all these messages, you locally say, does the other guy have precedence or do I have precedence? You can, even if you have ties, you can actually break them. That's why the vehicle ID is required. And everybody locally decides, I have precedence or I do not have precedence. And you let the other person go or not go. And once you basically have on the intersection, you can provide continuous updates. And then once you have crossed the intersection, you say, I've left the intersection. And it turns out that you can actually build not just one, you can actually build a family of protocols. And when you basically run simulations of this, on the x-axis is basically traffic volumes. I guess higher the volume, higher the probability of congestion. And then on the y-axis is the delay. Shorter the delay, better is the protocol through an intersection, for example. And what you see is that in the top curve there is the delays that occur when the traffic lights are being used with a 30-second rotation cycle per direction, and then when you reduce it to 10 seconds, you basically have that red curve, and at the bottom, the purple curve is the vehicle intersection protocol that we came up with. You can actually see the same intersections today. If all vehicles are capable of communicating with each other, you can significantly, dramatically reduce delays per intersection. It turns out. And then, because that will take a very long time for all vehicles capable of sensing the environment, communicate with each other, and be autonomous, going to take a long time. And this green curve, I've really not talked about it. This stands for perception-based intersection protocols. The idea is that vehicles have local sensing, right, if necessary when they are autonomous, and that may be vehicles that are not autonomous, could be manually driven, in which case you cannot communicate with them wirelessly, but you can use your sensors to know whether they exist or not. So humans who drive quote-unquote normally, our vehicles should be intelligent with sensors and communication capabilities. They will kind of use our intersection protocols, humans follow the normal protocol. It turns out that, of course, you will be losing some efficiency, but it's actually not a whole lot bad. Of course, that curve, the location of the curve depends upon assumptions you make, but it turns out that you can still win as the fraction of vehicles can drive themselves, as the fraction of vehicles can communicate with others increases over time, delays will actually go down significantly. That's what this slide is trying to say. Basically, significant improvements in delays through the intersection, significant improvements in throughput with the existing infrastructure. So then we said, so we then went back to that video from our sponsor and said, hey, vehicles were zipping past, right? So they didn't have to stop, do our V2V protocol and so on. So we said, why can't we actually do that as well? So we actually got rid of V2V in this case. The vehicles are not communicating with each other. It's actually a spatio-temporal intersection protocols. Vehicles basically arrive at the intersection at particular spatial slots, if you will, at particular time slots, if you will, and they're able to basically go to the intersection without really communicating at all. You just need to basically have a convention in place that everybody agrees with. You just need to have a local clock and know the schedule and basically go through this. Right? So this is really a snapshot, if you will. You can actually take this scenario, this protocol, to its maximum. Let me play that. So all you have to do is get into the vehicle, close your eyes, and you get to the other side without stopping. And it turns out this is quote-unquote an optimal protocol in the sense that if you stop the video at any given point in time, you'll fit as many cars as you can at in the intersection. Okay. So the previous video I showed you was just basically we reduce the traffic volume, but with maximum traffic volume, nobody needs to stop. Okay. This can be done. Right? So of course, the error margins need to be applied and so on, in which case you get closer to basically what was happening in the previous slide and so on. Okay. We call this the ballroom protocol. So basically imagine that you and your partner have learned ballroom dancing. You're basically in this ballroom, for example. We have a ballroom, I guess. Basically they're dancing. Right? So basically the dancers on the dance floor, ballroom floor are all making their dance step moving around. And if you basically are witnessing a nice dance group, nobody runs into each other as well. They're all moving, nobody runs into each other, correct? That's the same idea. Right? That's why we call it the ballroom protocol. Right? So basically as this technology basically pervades practice, you'll see that very interesting things can happen. Basically in Hollywood movies, you see the same thing happening in the sky, right? Where you can do it on the ground as well. Okay. So basically, the future can change, and the traffic signals don't need to exist actually. Right? And then with the maximum throughput, you see that basically every slot in the intersection is occupied by a car, right? And that's true any given point in time as well. So now I give you a sense for, hey, what technologies we are working on, how many advances we've been making or not making, and we talked about how the infrastructure, how we operate on the roads can literally change. But then the question is, hey, is this all talk? Is this all simulations, if you will? Can you do it, quote unquote, in the real world today? Right? So about what is the feasibility of the solutions, and are these vehicles really roadworthy? So let me give you a few videos for you. So this is the latest car that we built, the previous car, basically from 2007, whole bunch of sensors, looks like a beauty to engineers like us. Right? Look at all the cool stuff they can do with the sensors, but to the normal person, it is a monstrosity. Right? So we basically built this vehicle to actually look very normal on the outside and the inside, is what we did. And then this is the inside view as well. These screens in this case actually are showing what the computer is actually seeing through its sensor system, perception fusion system. That's what you're seeing. So it looks like a very normal car. You can drive it as a normal car as well. And the one thing that we did do was that we added a big red button. It's a safety critical system, it's a life critical system. If anything goes wrong, we can hit that button. At that point in time, we will electrically, electronically, and mechanically decouple everything that we added to the system. It becomes a stock car. You can take complete control over it. So let me play a couple of very quick videos in here. So the top left, the vehicle will be driving itself. The top right will be able to detect avoid obstacles. The bottom left here likely be able to avoid, use a four-way intersection, stop intersection protocol to be detect and avoid obstacles in the work zone. So let me just play those videos and concurrently in the interest of time. I want to play a couple of videos at length later. Here the vehicle is capable of controlling its actuators. Here basically, for example, it's actually driving around a bunch of garbage cans, and then garbage cans there and actually driving to the left. So it basically detects obstacles on the fly and then plans around them, and the vehicle is driving itself. And here basically it was able to go to a four-way intersection, know whether it came to the intersection first or second or third, and depending on it basically knows when to take its turn, right? Waits for somebody and then go. We heard that it actually announces this autonomous, it is ready to go to autonomous mode and so on, actually talks back to you. So let me play this quickly.
Entering construction zone.
It detected the construction zone, actually announced that. So it finds the channelizers in real time, drives away from them.
Exiting construction zone.
This was the end roadwork sign, and therefore it was the end of the construction zone. So of course the obvious question is how happens when that sign is not there. So there was basically all the videos that I showed in that previous slide are all in private, completely controlled excursions. We completely controlled it. Every ride that we run through it is very repeatable, right? Very reproducible. Right? And then we have taken it on the roads as well. Probably not going to play well. So let me switch to this one slide here. Let me just set this up. So then we basically have started driving around on public roads where the traffic is completely uncontrolled, of course. And every run we actually do is unique in its own kind. Right? Same path, same origin, same destination, but every ride is different because traffic is completely beyond our control. So what the lettering there says is that we actually gave a ride to the chairman of the U.S. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, one of the most powerful positions in the U.S. House, the lower house of the U.S. Congress, if you will, and he basically took a ride in our self-driving car. So let me just play that. That's me with the smartphone there. So this basically, the vehicle actually was driving 33 miles from a location outside Pittsburgh to the Pittsburgh International Airport, drove through a local park, drove through a local suburban highway with 11 traffic lights where you will stop, then took an interstate highway, took an exit from the highway, became an entry ramp to a second highway, and then here actually you will see the lane changing, the vehicle changing lanes, like if you watch close enough, and drove to the airport. And then I guess it should right about here should be changing lanes. So it did that multiple times as well. Usually on the central lane, now it's on the right lane, like the right lane, and then actually knows to take the entry point to the airport, knows to basically take the departure lane, and then slowly, gently moves to the curb. So this chairman was so impressed that he said, can you bring this vehicle to Washington, D.C.? I want to show my colleagues on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I want them to get the same experience. So we took it to Washington, D.C. last year and then gave about 20 legislators in the U.S. Transportation Committee and the Science and Technology Committee, which primarily funds all of research in the U.S. from the federal government. And they were given rides loop around Capitol Hill. Most people got that, and some people also got a ride on the interstate highway there from Capitol Hill to the Pentagon, I-395 South, and way back to the Capitol Hill, about 6.5 miles each way. So we did that, and so that's basically highway, if you will. Capitol is a very interesting animal, and then lately we've been working on driving on urban roads. So let me show you that. Let me cut off the music and let the. So this is actually 8-block loop very close to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. This is basically a major thoroughfare called Fifth Avenue in Pittsburgh, and we're actually driving along a road that basically takes us to CMU. CMU is basically up ahead. That's all CMU. This is actually DOMS at CMU. We're actually driving there. There are traffic lights that actually sees and detects and stops. And if we go further ahead, I guess I know what's happening. Whenever I press the laser button, it stops. And further ahead would be University of Pittsburgh, our sister university. That tall tower that you said belongs to our sister university there. A crazy amount of pedestrian foot traffic as well. And then this kind of completes group, that tower that we saw is actually on the left of us here. So I should say this. This demo is actually edited here. There are a couple of crazy things that did happen, so we didn't quite highlight that here. We are tweaking this so that we are able to drive safely in this environment. There are people and students crossing the roads, many of them jaywalk, cross illegally and so on. So this is still being tweaked. So the urban is happening, but not quite there. And then, so this is all research, correct? So you can do whatever you want, then you can edit videos and such. And then let me show you an article from Wired magazine, and many of us know this, Wired.com is fairly popular as well. So this is the headline that they wrote earlier this year. It says, "This is big. A robo car just drove across the country." So our team from Carnegie Mellon, we created a spin-off named Automatica. You actually see that name out here. You may not be able to read it from the back. So our technology actually drove this Delphi car. Delphi sponsored it, but so it was our technology driving the car. It drove from San Francisco to New York City, a 3,500 mile distance. It drove itself on the highways alone from San Francisco to New York City. When they would take a break and go to stay at a hotel and so on, get meals and such, they would take over manual. But on the highways, it drove itself about 98.6% of the time. It drove itself. I believe this is the first ever such drive, at least in the US, from the West Coast to the East Coast. So that's what happened with Delphi, and I guess I should be happy to say that Delphi, the company that actually sponsored it, ended up buying our company Automatica about 3 months back. So it turns out that even though I was the primary founder, I'm no longer with the company. I'm back on campus doing the next frontier, I believe, in this domain. So it's time to wrap up to give you a summary of where we are. So challenges, which I think are really opportunities for researchers. How do you prove correctness? Right? There are massive interactions among very complex layers, but the end result, the vehicle, which is the system here, has to be safe. Right? Each layer by itself can be perfect, but when they put together, the vehicle has to be safe. And from a sensing perception point of view, we being at SenSys, there's a huge amount of work to be done on the sensor domain. They are either costly or have too many problems, right? Or they look ugly, if you will. So there's a lot of work to be done in the sensing domain. Humans in the loop, I see for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 50-20 years, a human still has to be in the driver's seat. The vehicle may be driving itself, but a licensed driver must be in the driver's seat. Right? So therefore, basically a bunch of human factors questions come up. The vehicle says take over, the human may be in no position to take over. Right? So that has to be addressed as well, which is a huge, huge thing. And then, of course, the real world basically has a bunch of uncertainties. They need to be modeled, but the real world, you have to deal with it as well, with appropriate degradation, whatever else. And then we have to actually cooperate among the vehicles as well as with the infrastructure, right? So and then the question basically becomes, when is the infrastructure going to become capable of doing this, communicating with vehicles? When are other vehicles going to be capable of communicating with our vehicle? Right? So these are all challenges, but from a research standpoint, these are all major opportunities for a research community like this. And if any of this really sounds like a pipe dream for you, so we think it's a drive in the park. So let me thank you for your patience. Let me stop here and take a few questions. Thank you, folks.